Interviews are a sales pitch, whether we like it or not. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to be sold to. In fact, I have in keynotes and all kinds of conversations, I have asked audiences and individuals over the years if they like to be sold to.
Ooh.
And in a big audience, occasionally I get a couple hands. And when I ask them why they like to be told or sold to, these people who raise their hands always say the same thing. It's either altruism or voyeurism. Altruistically, they know that sales is hard and they like to see how other people do it. And that's the voyeurism part a little bit, but they get that it's hard. And so they're kind of empathetic. That's a lot why they say they like to be sold to. It's altruistic. They want to pay it forward. And then voyeurism, they like to see how other people sell and see, how badly they do it, or if they can glean some things. But, those are the only reasons I found that people like to be sold to. Most people don't like to be on the receiving end of a sales pitch. Well, guess what? That's true of job candidates as well. I've sat in many interviews where job candidates at about minute 7 or 8 roll their eyes because the interviewer is blathering on and on about the future of this and the benefit of that. Well, it's one of the reasons that I like to talk about interviews being a sales pitch is most interviewers are not natural born salespeople. And I want to help you get better at that. So I've called on a leading sales expert, my friend and colleague, Tony Mayo. Now, Tony is the business owner's executive coach. And he's worked with some companies that you've never heard of before. Organizations like General Electric, I know you've never heard of them. Accenture, who's that? He's also founded bootstrap and venture-backed startups. And he's taught at the college, graduate, and executive levels. So we got a well-qualified expert here. He's the best-selling author of 2 books. And as I mentioned, he's a sales expert. And I've seen Tony speak on sales. I was in a class he led at one point in time. And I thought Tony's ideas were so practical that my audience needed to hear from him. So Tony, welcome. I'm so glad that you're with us today. And thanks for agreeing to share your sales expertise.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you got value from what I presented and wanted to share it with more people. And I should explain or clarify something you said, which may seem counterintuitive.
Yeah, sure.
All the time when I tell people that I work with business owners, top executives, and salespeople, and they go, that's an odd combination. I mean, one's sort of elite and aspirational. The other is not a job a lot of people want. I mean, very few people look at their newborn baby and say, oh, I hope he's a salesman. But here's the link that makes it possible for me to work with those people in the same way. Whether you're a manager or a salesperson, your business success depends on your ability to get other people to take action towards your goals. It's the same job.
So what I take in that, Terry, is we're all selling something. We may be selling a product or a service if we're a salesperson. We may be selling an idea if we're a business owner or executive. And anybody who interviews, people watching this include recruiters and staffing professionals, HR folks, and also hiring managers. And all of them in interviews are selling. They're selling opportunity. So I love that you said that there's a link.
I'll make it even simpler, Scott.
Yeah.
We're always selling someone else to take action.
Yeah.
The product is someone else taking action. Maybe it's writing a check. Maybe it's accepting a job offer. Maybe it's just reorganizing the supply closet. But what we're doing is persuading people that it is in their interest to take action.
Well, let's play on that then, because the action that we want top talent to take, if we're interviewing top talented people and they fit our organization and they fit our job, the action we want them to take is to say yes if made a job offer. So let's play on that. What I notice a lot of interviewers doing in interviews is what I call the verbal vomit. And yeah, I know that's gross. They vomit ideas and words. In fact, before we started the video, I said to you, I've watched interviews where a 45-minute interview, the interviewer spends 35 minutes spewing details all over the candidate and only spends 10 minutes asking questions. And they do that for, really innocent reasons. They love their company. They love their job. They're excited about this person in front of them, so they want to impart all of those details. But it comes at risk. You know, if I'm the candidate, is this who I want to work for? Am I going to be talked to like this every day, where this leader is going to blather on and on all over me every day? Is this what my life's going to be like? This is what goes through the candidate's head. So I know that you're really good at helping people think ahead. You have already said you want people to think about the actions that we want others to take. So what steps can interviewers take to avoid engaging in this thing I call the verbal vomit?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll start by making a bold statement, and then I think I'll bolster it and make it something that people can understand. And that is, the key to selling is not what you say. It's what you hear. You want to hear them say yes. You want to hear them say, I will do that commute. I will be happy with that salary. I can do this particular task. It's what the other person says that we're going for. Well, going from there, if what we're trying to do is get other people to say things, that's an action, then we should give them more opportunity to say things. So the more I talk, there's a truism in sales. The person who talks the most leaves with the product. You don't want that to be the salesperson. And worse, if you're the manager, you don't want to be the one who leaves with the task to do. That's got to go to someone else. The easiest to apply, to remember, trick or insight for not speaking too much in an interview situation or in a management situation is to ask questions. People are, in our culture, are trained from a very early age that when a person in authority asks you a question, you answer it. That's how we got through school. So when we start asking the interviewee questions or subordinate questions, they're going to give us answers, and they're talking. And that gives us information we can use for our follow-up question. So we can help them to see and say things that will tend towards having them take the action we want. One of the rules here is, it's if the prospect, job interviewer, or the subordinate, it only counts if the prospect says it. So if I'm sitting there talking about how great the company is, what the growth opportunities are, they have to doubt it. It's just human nature. We have to come up with counter cases, exceptions, concerns. But if I say it, it's true. So I ask the prospect some questions. They say why they like the job. Now it becomes fact. So only counts if the prospect says it. The easiest way to get the prospect to say what it takes to move forward with action is questions.
There's so much of what you said that I loved, and I have to start with, it's not what we say, it's what we hear. And what we hear is what they also hear. So the candidate, if we're doing our job well and it's a fit, is talking him or herself into the job if we allow him or her to do it. In fact, Tony, I've often said to people who sell that buyers always believe themselves. Always, unless they're crazy. They always believe themselves, but only sometimes believe us if we're selling. So I'm going to play the odds here. That's what I hear you talking about.
Yes,
and the way we do that is by planning questions. And this is important. I know this is simple, and some people watching this might go, well, Tony's telling me something I already know. So let's discuss that. If people already know they should be asking questions, but maybe they're not, what do you think's going on there, Tony? I mean, if people were watching this, if they looked at their own behavior, they might be shocked to find that while they know they should be asking questions, if they honestly assessed what an interview looked like, they're not doing it as much as they should. So talk about that for just a moment, if you would.
Well, one way to make someone feel appreciated, welcomed, wanting to interact with you more is to demonstrate genuine curiosity. And think about this. How do you know someone's genuinely curious about you and what you're discussing? Well, they ask follow-up questions, don't they? Yeah. What about this? What about that? Tell me more about this. So by doing that sort of thing, people will get that you are interested. So sure, prepare, have some questions that you want to cover with the person, but don't just go through it in a perfunctory, automated manner. Make sure that you're asking follow-ups. And the all-purpose follow-up, and I know it's all-purpose because I'll admit sometimes my mind wanders. And
I'm sorry, what did
more
you
than
just say?
once, I've been interviewing someone, and there'll be this pause, and I'll realize it's my turn,
Right.
and I don't know what was just said. So,
Right.
here's the all-purpose question, whether you're spaced out or not, which is, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And then they tell you what they just said in more detail, and they feel good because you're asking for clarification. So clarifying questions based on a sincere, genuine curiosity, very powerful. People, it's being listened to is hard to distinguish from being loved. Now, I use the word love more than typical coaches and management advisors, but it's essential to so much of our work interaction. Now, by love, I'm not talking about romance. I'm not trying to encourage any Weinstein moments.
Right.
My working definition of love in this regard is if I have a genuine concern and interest in how this person's future goes, that's love. I am trying to make their life better, even if it's just for the next 20, 30 minutes by how I interact with them. So when I listen sincerely, ask questions based on genuine curiosity, people notice that I care. And we want to be around people who are interested in and care about us.
I agree with you. You didn't say it this way, but what I heard, Tony, was there's a fine line between listening and love. And that's so incredibly true. I've found in the course of my work, and I suspect you have as well, is that, and people have said this, is, you know, it's so nice to be heard, to be listened to. They may not be getting that at home. They may not be getting that from their kids or their spouse, especially if those kids are teenagers. And so they come to a coach, they come to an advisor, or they come to an interview. And maybe nobody listened to them that day, but now this person's hanging on their every word. That is so incredibly attractive.
It is.
In a non-sexual way, and you acknowledge that. Yeah. And you said something really important that I want to make sure everybody heard, and that is, all too often when we write this list of questions down, it can become a perfunctory exercise where we check the boxes. We know that we're not just checking the boxes. When we take what the person says and integrate that into our next question, I've called these integrated questions for that reason, because it demonstrates to them that we were listening, we're hearing, and we're understanding. That's such an important part of this. And we're delving deeper. What a loving, kind thing to do. And if we're doing that, that's such the opposite of the verbal vomit where I'm just spewing things on you, hoping you like some of it. I don't think that's as effective. So beautifully said, Tony. Thank you. So one of the things I've heard you talk about in this context of dialogue is that successful selling and the dialogue in selling involves discussing pain and gain. So explain that if you would. Why is that important in interviewing, and how does it apply, this discussion of pain and gain in selling, and how it applies to interviewing?
So we need a motivation to do something, or a motive. And that word is, the history of it, the root of it is the same as motion. So the movement, automotive, locomotive, which I guess is crazy movement, but we need to get people to move, because I'm all about having them take action.
Right.
So what motivates people? Well, it's the same thing that motivates all life. In fact, there's a pretty good argument that the first complex life forms had developed the ability to move towards food sources and away from threats. It's pain gain at the cellular level. Yeah. That's what movement was created for, apparently, was to move towards things we need and away from things we don't want. Now, one of those is a lot stronger than the other. And that makes sense too. If we're not very quick and efficient at avoiding pain, we might not get another chance. You know, if you miss one saber-toothed tiger, you're done. You miss some ripe fruit or catching a fish, well, you'll get another try. So moving towards gains always has a lower priority than avoiding pains. Something else I notice is that as you move up the organization and further along people's careers, that balance shifts a bit, maybe because they have more security or maybe because something about their personality that put them in the higher position. They're more interested in talking about gains than pains. But for the vast majority of the population and of living things, if we can point out to them that they have a pain or they're encountering a threat, they'll do something about that. Whereas if we discuss gains and possibilities and futures, some people will take action on that, but not as many and not as quickly.
So I hear a couple of things in your responses. Number one, we have to know our audience. We have to know what drives them. We have to know their motives. And I love this idea that you have about the org chart, is that the higher up the org chart, the more we may be driven by gain, the lower down the org chart by pain. Very important consideration. And I think this also goes back to what we started with today, is if we're engaging in this dialogue that isn't just the perfunctory list of questions.
Back and forth.
We're really, the back and forth. And as I listen and I use those integrative questions and I start to talk about, or we start to dialogue about things, I'm going to hear, if I'm listening carefully, about somebody's gains they're hoping for or pains they're hoping to avoid. And if I then ask questions around that, I can then potentially point out how the job addresses that specific pain that they're looking to avoid. Maybe it's a that they don't like, or gains such as, you know, being able to rise up an org chart because they see themselves in an executive role someday. If I'm really listening and having this great dialogue, and I'm dialed into the fact that people are driven by these core motives, going back to saber-toothed tigers, I have a much better chance of really meeting that person's needs. Is that true?
And you can find this out pretty easily.
Yeah.
In fact, my version of the elevator pitch, which you can use to avoid vomiting for 20 minutes on the job interview and just give the basic, is think about what pains getting this job would solve for a person and what opportunities it creates.
Yeah.
And just make a list of these. And generally you come up with more problems that it solves than opportunities it creates. That's fine. And I think a typical elevator pitch should have 2 pains and 1 gain, because that's sort of the ratio in the general population. So if I introduce myself to someone, say I'm the business owner's executive coach, people come to me generally because they're frustrated that they just can't get the full productivity out of their employees. And they feel like if they just got that extra 5 or 10%, it would make a huge difference. Or they're sick and tired of working so hard and missing so many family events. But some of the people I work with see an opportunity that they know if they just get themselves clear and organized, they could take advantage of this great new growth possibility. I don't know if any of those apply to you, but if they do, please let me know. And typically people respond by saying, well, it's not exactly that, but let me tell you what I'm really going after. And they'll tell me whether it's a pain or a gain, a problem or a vision. But 2 pains, 1 gain, it gets them thinking in those terms.
Yeah.
Sometimes they pick one that you offered. More often, that opens the doors and they tell you exactly where to put your lever to put them into motion.
Well, and I don't know if you intended this or not, but you also gave another solution for avoiding, you've just given us some Pepto-Bismol for the verbal vomit here, because if I engage in that, if I know myself, if I'm being honest, this idea of pains and gains can allow me to plan a very short 2 pain, 1 gain explanation of the job opportunity or the company. And if I know that I blather on and on, I can plan that ahead of time. And just like an elevator pitch where I'm selling a service or selling myself as a candidate, I can have this ready to go for interviews too. So
exactly. And notice
formula.
It turns into a question. After I make my statements about my experience in the past, I make it easy for them to disagree. I say, probably none of these apply to you, but I'd be interested in hearing what concerns you do have in this area. And then they tell you. It's a question again. I've stated something, not imposing it on them, not saying they have to feel this way. In fact, you probably don't feel this way. And they have a lot of freedom to tell me what's really going on. And that's what I need to help them make a good decision.
I love that. You know, these probably don't apply to you. It's a benefit of the doubt kind of approach in case it does not. So tell me what does. And you know, you hit on something that is so important for the verbal vomiters of the world, is one of the ways you get yourself out of that is don't end statements with a statement. End everything you say with a question, because that then shifts the dynamic. It doesn't require that you continue to talk. We set ourselves up to talk too much sometimes because we keep talking versus posing a question at the end of each thing we say. And it's a great way to keep the other person talking. And so many people miss that very simple thing. So beautifully stated. So Tony, we've got a couple minutes left, and I'd be remiss if I didn't get to one more thing. And it's one of the things I think that you do that's different. And that is you don't avoid problems. I've heard you talk about pre-selling a problem. And I was fascinated by that concept. So many people want to avoid the stuff that could create conflict, avoid the thing or dodge the bullet that could kill a deal or kill a hire. So talk about pre-selling a problem and how that applies to interviewing top talent.
All right. Well, the sort of normal human inclination, we talked earlier about how much people like to avoid pain.
Right.
It's probably something about the job that you're interviewing people to fill that is not thrilling, that you've noticed people quit over this, people turn the job down because of this. Maybe it's the location. You know, the office may not be comfortable. The commute may be difficult. The company may have a reputation of working people too hard. Come on. You know these things. I hope you're doing exit interviews so you learn it and you're paying attention to why candidates don't accept your offers. And our thought is, well, if we can sugarcoat that stuff or avoid it altogether, maybe it won't be a factor. Well,
Right.
First of all, that's dishonest. And you don't want to be dishonest all day long in your job. You want to be frank with people. But the other way to look at it is take the assumption that eventually the job candidates will have to face this issue. Now, do you want them making their choice about the job over this issue when they're sitting home by themselves, tired and worried, or when they're sitting with you or talking with you on the phone, when you can give them some more information, some consolation, some ideas about handling the problem? Well, if you're really earning your pay, you want that person to address their concerns while they're with you. So we make it very safe for them to bring these concerns up by having lots of questions and a non-judgmental attitude. But if they don't come up with it, I want to bring it up. And this is, some of you have been involved in debate training, you know that's a fundamental of debate. You bring up the weak point.
Yeah.
So you set the terms and you can deal with it. So one thing here in the Washington, D.C. area that most of my clients have to deal with is the commute. If they're hiring someone from the wrong side of the Potomac River, that becomes a huge flaming moat at some point.
Yeah.
So they have to ask about that. In fact, I encourage them to go beyond asking about it because let's face it, in a job interview situation, people are agreeable. Everything is possible. Sure, I'm happy to do that. Well, maybe you should schedule your next interview for 8:30 a.m. so they actually know what the commute is like and they can make an informed decision about it. I've had too many clients who've gone through a long interview process, thrilled to finally get that key person on board. And after 2-3 days or a couple of weeks, they say, I just can't handle the commute, ruining my life. Hey, if it's going to be a problem, I bring it up on my terms. And I'm skeptical about how they solve it. If they just come back and say, oh yeah, that commute's no problem, I can handle that. And I'll say, well, tell me a bit about how it'll affect your schedule. You know, would you have to get up earlier? Would the spouse have to get the kids dressed? Do you possibly have to get familiar with the metro system or the buses? This is called the rehearsal. It's another sales technique. I want to make sure people have thought through in detail the conversations they have to follow through on the action they're committing to. Because too many job offers and sales fall apart after a few days for reasons invisible to us because we haven't helped them think through the actual steps of fulfilling on their commitment.
Well, and let's mix metaphors for a minute. It's kind of like dating. You're talking about rehearsal. It's kind of like dating. It's why so many relationships failed is dating is a simulation. A relationship is real. And so when you get into the relationship and then it blows apart and you're going, what happened? Well, the simulation didn't tell you everything you needed to know. You needed to make it more real. And that's what I hear you talking about. I also thought about, you know, if you sugarcoat something, eventually the sugar is going to dissolve. And the crap that's inside of there, Tony, is going to cause problems. if they weren't addressed honestly up front. And so actually have, all too often viewers want to be accommodating. Let's have somebody come in where they're not dealing with the issues. No, you're saying let's deal with the issues, because we're having a more honest appraisal on both sides of whether or not this is going to be a fit.
And as a persuader, an influencer, a
Yes.
manager, a leader, someone interviewing job candidates, my job is to help people make good decisions and get into action.
Yeah.
That's the job. So if you're not willing to deal with their problems, their concerns, their roadblocks, you're not doing your job.
Maybe interviewers should start thinking themselves more facilitators based on what you just said. Is I want to facilitate everybody making the right decision for themselves versus being the influencer to get this person to do what I want them to do. But all too often later on, they end up doing what they need to do when it doesn't fit. But if I facilitate a mutually beneficial decision, which is what I'm hearing you say, we're all going to win. Tony, before we go, if you would, great stuff. I know you've got a ton of content and videos and a lot of just really smart, savvy things on your website. Would you please tell everybody who's watching how they could learn more about you and your work and all the content that you have?
Well, the place to start is tonymayo.com, TonyMayo.com. And you'll find there's also a YouTube video channel where I discuss more of these questioning techniques and so on. So in fact, I'll send a few links to you, Scott, that you can put in the show notes so people can go directly to some PDFs and brief videos explaining these techniques of how to ask questions, how to have a conversation run in a way that makes everyone comfortable and all of you with a clear commitment to action at the end.
Yeah, having watched you in action in person and having seen some of your videos, I have to say, in this case, I would not want to hold the mayo. I had to do it. I want to lather on that mayo because, as you can tell, Tony has this well thought through. This isn't, that he stayed in a Holiday Inn Express last night and is well rested and just came up with these ideas. Tony's been at this for a number of years, and he understands, even though he is not a hiring expert, he is, because hiring is sales, and we're selling opportunity. And you just heard from one of the leading experts in sales. And thank you, Tony. I mean, this is so practical and down to earth. This is why I wanted you to be a part of this dialogue. Is I want people to be able to change how they hire, and it only works if we have a practical approach. And you did that so beautifully today. So everybody, please
thanks
check
for having
Tony
me,
out.
Scott. It's always a joy to talk to someone who gets it. Thank you, Scott. It's always good to talk to someone who gets it, who understands what I'm trying to accomplish.
Well, you're doing it well, Tony. Thanks. And thanks to all who are watching. And if you enjoyed today's video, I hope you will share it with your friends. Thanks, Tony, and thanks everybody for watching. Take care now.